Hi, so I wanted to make another video about something that came up yesterday, and I was talking to one of my, well, a friend that I'm helping with English. Anyways, we came into this idea that it's like, oh, so when you travel, you actually are able to also deal with things on a physical level. I don't know if that makes sense to you right now, but anyways, so here's my chart going to Greece, as you can probably see right here. So it's not like any national holiday, so I'm not posting the flag up behind me, but well, I should actually like post it elsewhere in this room, but it's I got lazy and I was like, nah, I'll just use this one. So uh, so when it comes to dealing with things like emotions, right? Um, we think about. Actually, I'm gonna move this back here a little bit here. So we tend to think about. I'll go back to the chart. So we think about processing the emotions. In other words, we're always taught either depending on the culture apparently, but we came to this sort of like dual sort of thing, or rather this either you suppress it or you don't suppress emotions. So when we deal with emotions, many times in Western culture, we're taught to just let it out, express emotion. But I think what's missing there is expressing the emotion and reliving it in our heads because we're talking about it, we're expressing it literally verbally, and it reminds us in our thoughts. And when we have an argument, and it goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. So, in other words, it's repeating itself in our thoughts rather than releasing the actual physical emotion. One of my coaches, he went through some um, I guess you can say, I don't know what to call it, but he has his own coach specifically he's a psychotherapist he talks about gazelles, gazelles, like in Africa with the horns, the big long pointy horns that go straight up. So they're very skinny, right? So they run when they're in trouble. They run fast, of course, but what happens is that after, let's say, a lion tries to chase them, but they survive the escape, right? They're like, ah. What happens is their physical body goes through this sort of traumatic experience of like, oh my God, I almost died. Oh my God, I almost died. So it's the physical body going through it. But as humans, we don't do that. It goes into our heads because we have the ego. Their survival mechanism of survival is attached directly to identification and association. So I call it that way. Whatever. I'm not a psychologist, okay? I'm not saying that I know anything. But according to what this psychotherapist said, that they do that. But what happens is after they get, so what that meant was that after they, what do you call this? After they get chased by a lion or a tiger, whatever, lions, or hyenas, whatever, they shake it off by jumping, right? Or some creatures, they don't just do that. They like, they release it, physically releasing the emotional experience, the trauma, the fright, the all that stuff, because they don't, it's not supposed to be embedded into the brain. But as humans, again, like I said, we don't do that. Most of us don't. Um, we just it gets lodged in there, and it becomes like this unconscious behavior over time. So we were talking about it. So I think it's best, instead of like expressing it, to release it instead. The word is release, not express. Same thing with the opposite of expression, which is suppression, which is in many Eastern cultures, like say East Asia, particularly. I don't know, Asian, whatever, doesn't matter. In many cultures, it's suppressed, whereas you don't show the emotion. So the key there is release of emotions. How do you release the emotions? Well, you release the emotions through physical expression. It's the body, letting the body do the work. Because I've gone through therapy before, and it helped a little bit, because I'm still running the thoughts in my head. I have those beliefs in my head, right? When we have those thoughts repeating in our head, right? A belief is a thought that repeats itself. So if a thought keeps running through your head and eventually it becomes a belief, then isn't that not helpful? Like, you become objective about it, sure, but once again, the thoughts are still there. I'm not saying that we get rid of thoughts, because we cannot get rid of thoughts, but it's our reaction that goes through how we deal with that. So it's not to say that we shouldn't go through therapy or anything like that, but when we go through therapy, not so much therapy itself, but like what I've gone through, like even like with writing journals and all that stuff, it helps to have an objective, yes, perspective on it. But what happens is that there's a part of it that gets missed, the physical expression. This is why people, they feel like they had this urge to cry when we see movies, the urge to release through dancing, through some sort of movement, right? The body is a source of, what do you call this? Reactivity. It's, to me, that's how I see it, at least. Okay, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a psychotherapist, any of those things, but from my experience, it's released through this stuff. This is why I do yoga. This is why I do the Wim Hof method. This is why Qigong, I do all that stuff. I used to do swimming, and having physical release. Keyword there, release. Is similar. I would probably say I would correlate it with the idea of Ajina Mojani, the one who experienced near-death experience. I'll post a link beside to one of our channels. He's awesome. He talks about how all that stuff, the love that's our source is there, and she experienced it. It's like, believe it or not, it doesn't matter. The point is, she said something about instead of asking ourselves, how do I forgive someone? The better question is, how do I release someone? Because when we're forgiving, it's almost, to me, it feels almost there's a sort of a correlation between forgiving and repeating the thoughts of what happened, of the traumatic experience that we experienced. So, tying this back, sorry, I babbled there, to traveling. I noticed, if you may already know, traveling is in the third and ninth houses, right? So third and ninth houses. I'm not showing my actual birth chart here, so third and ninth houses. There's nothing here in this chart because it's a relocation chart. But if you already seen my chart, there's a lot of planets in my third house. So it's also about local environment, so short distance traveling. But it's also the house of taken for granted skills. So what does that mean? How does that tie into travel? Well, when we're traveling, sometimes we get so caught up with this awareness of, let's say we're just going from work to work. It's almost like an unconscious behavior. But the conscious, the third house, right there, sorry, the third house right here, is all about that conscious, bringing into awareness, bring light into our experience of what we go through. But it's opposing house, right? It's partner's house, so to speak, I don't know, ninth house, is the lessons we learned through living. That's why it's also called the superconscious. Become really aware of, it's more like beliefs, right? They tie in together. What we repeat in thoughts and conscious in our waking life becomes a belief, ninth house. How that ties into traveling is that there's a reason why we like to travel. Because when we're traveling, what's the main thing that happens when traveling? It's not just exploration, but the action of moving, the action of exploring. So it's almost like our bodies are dictating that. And as actually, I read somewhere that the reason why we like travel is because it's actually part of our nature to travel. We've been doing it for tens and thousands of years, or hundreds of thousands of years of traveling, not because it's traveling, literally traveling, but it's this desire to move, this desire to hunt, desire to get somewhere, do something, explore, discover, catch something, learn something. It's that thing. right? I would say all creatures do this, at least all non-plant or whatever the term is, and like creatures, so animals. But traveling is always happening anyways, right? Energy travels, right? Energy is everywhere. So the idea of traveling is a natural phenomenon that occurs in every single thing. Even atoms travel, right? Even the most solid thing has a vibration. This is why solid things just take longer to travel. But it is traveling. It's because it's changing form over time. Why do you think things get old and they degrade? Right? Of course. Right? You might not think, okay, so plastic and metal and hard things or some. Okay, sure, but they still do over time, even if it's like hundreds and thousands of years. They degrade. So degradation is a form of traveling. Degradation in terms of movement. I'm talking about traveling movement, not just the perspective of traveling, like go from place to place, but movement. So movement is a natural approach to all of us. So I would say that it points out to traveling in terms of third and ninth houses. It really is like not just that. Like, so how does this relate directly to astrology? I would say that in the third house, when we're bringing consciousness into movement or these what we do specifically on a day-to-day basis, or aware of it, right? If we looked at even just the definitions, let's take a look here. Local environment where you live in, okay? Communication, there's where it is. So communication, I'm trying to see how this connects to taken for granted skills, but I would say taken for granted skills in this case, not just mine, but anybody's third house placement, would be skills that because we're communicating something, sometimes we become so conscious about it that we don't take time to pause for a second and say, how do I communicate to myself the thoughts that it's the adaptability. It's also the third house is here, the adaptability of the mind to learn new ideas, right? So that means that when we're aware of it, new ideas, we also realize that maybe because it's always new, we start to forget that, wait a second, there's things that I missed or things that I kind of left behind because it's like new. That's the way I'm interpreting it right now. I'm talking about general third house stuff, travel, and then ninth house is a similar thing, right? It's the long distance travel. It's the public opinion, right? I talked about it in a previous video. It's the super conscious, more than awareness, but having to deal with unawareness in a sort of a spread out fashion. I don't know if that makes sense, right? So it's more spiritual communication. It is more intuition. It is intuition. Okay, so public opinion. So public opinion kind of ties in, I would say, with but also the lessons we learn through living. It's tied in with that taken for granted skills because we're moving and then we're up here, but we're not going back to basics. And so this is what the ninth house does. Everything in life we experience has polarities. Polarities reveal and manifest reality. Without the polarities, you won't know what is. It manifests reality, right? So, so with the ninth house stuff, when it comes to traveling, it ties in with the third house for that specific reason. And then tying it back to what my friend and I were talking about, how it's what do you call this? That traveling or movement helps us to deal with emotions. Is that exact same thing? Now if we go back to tying this to my relocation chart, we'll see here that what rules, what sign was in the cusp of the third house here? So Gemini. So where we go? Mercury, right here.